Good evening and welcome everyone. We are here meeting at Municipal Hall on Monday, January the 11th. This is our first regular council meeting of 2021 and just start off by calling the meeting to order. With that, we just want to recognize that we're having this meeting on the traditional territories of the Coast and Straits Salish peoples, specifically the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations. Their connection to these lands continue to this day. With that, I want to we start off with an approval of the agenda. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any changes, modifications? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. Next, we just have adoption of council meeting minutes and public hearing reports. Yes, go ahead, Councilor Patterson.
Move adoption.
Moved and second. Any discussion, corrections, amendments, changes? Not seeing any. I will call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Under Mayor's remarks, these are fairly brief today. Happy New Year, everyone. Nice to be back in the chambers with staff and council. We have a very sparse chamber as people are very spread out in here, but it's nice to see people's faces as we sit. This is our first meeting under the new procedures bylaw, so it should go reasonably smoothly, I hope, but there may be a few little hiccups as we fall into habits from the previous procedures bylaw, but hopefully it'll be a bit clearer to everyone as we're moving on. I just want to point out that the first portion of this agenda is just council business, and then we're going to a section that involves allowance of public input on the agenda items. So the call-in for that, we're using a toll-free number through Zoom to be able to call in. So that is on the agenda package, just right above the call to order. If you want to have a look at that, it's a 1-855 number, and it has the ID and code number there. If people wish to call in, that's the link. I also just want to, if you have any problems getting through, please just keep trying because I think it should work fine. We have tested it. I also just want to remind all people watching and all of council the due date for members of the committees and commissions is coming up this Friday. And so we'd just like to encourage anybody who's interested in any of our committees, commissions, or arts laureate position, that those are open and accepting applications at this time. So if you're interested in serving the community in ways big or small, this municipality has benefited tremendously over the decades from the expertise and knowledge brought to us by our residents through those bodies. That's it. Welcome everybody, and I look forward to this first meeting. So first up on the items here, we have the secondary suite study. We have, I believe, Ms. Jensen from our manager of planning and Mr. Wong from Urban Systems, who are going to do an overview of the strategy and take some direction from council. I just want to point out, because we are, in the interest of clarity, trying to make it clear for the public where there is public input and where there isn't. And unfortunately on the agenda, it sort of says secondary suites not for public input. And of course, what we're talking about here is how we're going to do public input on secondary suites next. So I just thought I'd just flag that, because I think if I read that through the first time, you might get the wrong impression that we're not seeking public input. Tonight, we're just deciding on what options to put up for public input. I also just want to acknowledge this work is part of a broader continuum of housing, something that this council has set a significant priority on. So this is one aspect. There's many other aspects within the housing framework that will be coming forward, but the suites was established right at the end of the last term to move forward with. It's been delayed a little bit from the housing needs report as we use that to guide all of our housing decisions, and this is one important step to move it forward. This is also, I'll leave it at that, I guess. So just for those at home wondering, we're not really here debating the merits or the lack thereof of suites here. We're really here as a governance touch point. Is the layout that's going forward adequate? Are the changes you want to make, and should we expand or contract some of that, those pieces going forward? So with that, I will invite Ms. Jensen, our manager of planning, to do an introduction. Ms. Jensen, are you online?
I am. Thank you, Your Worship. And thank you for the opportunity to provide council with an update on the secondary suite study.
Can you, Ms. Jensen, can I just ask you to stop?
That's prepared by Urban Systems.
We don't seem to be getting it amplified.
Hi, Deb. Can you hear me?
I can?
Hi, Deborah. We're just going to be working on the speaker here for a second. Can you wait and I'll let you know when it's good to go ahead?
Sure, you bet.
Thank you.
Sorry, for those at home, we're just, we want to make sure that the voice that's coming through on the Zoom call is also being amplified through our streaming system. So people who are just watching at home but not participating can get the full audio. So if you can hold on a minute. This is, again, a
He's
new
on his way.
approach.
He's on his way. Oh, yeah, you. Thank you, Hugh. It's not broadcasting through the speaker?
It seems like change never quite comes with, seamless improvement. It always seems to take a couple of steps forward and one step back as we sort of move it incrementally forward. So I know this is a better platform because it allows people to call in more directly than calling into a main number. Makes it a bit more seamless for everybody. It'd be managed in this room, but it's also apparently we're having one little minor glitch. We can hear, we just can't broadcast it.
Let's try now. Can somebody speak?
Sure, Ms. Jensen, can you speak again just so we can hear your tone of your voice?
Speaking now.
That works fantastically. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to our staff for helping fix that so quickly. All right, Ms. Jensen, welcome back. If you could just start over again, I just want to make sure everybody watching at home hears what you have to say.
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight, we're intending to present the draft strategy, which has been prepared by Urban Systems before undertaking further community consultation in the next coming weeks. Following from a brief update at the November 16th council meeting, tonight we'd like to introduce the draft strategy. So as council is aware, staff have been working on the secondary suite study, which is one of the components that makes up the overall housing framework, which is part of council's strategic priorities. To date, we have undertaken a background review where, for example, we've been looking at district plans and policies. We've looked at the regulatory environments from other municipalities. So in other words, what works and what doesn't when it comes to regulating secondary suites. We have also undertaken community engagement through open houses, surveys, and pop-up booths. All of this has led to the draft strategy, representing an overall roadmap of what the district could consider as part of the secondary suite program. The staff report provides an outline of the content found within the draft strategy, including the various attributes that impact a secondary suite program and some sample scenarios of how those attributes can be packaged together. Following council's consideration tonight, we will then be undertaking community consultation to obtain public feedback on these attributes and scenarios. And following that, the final strategy will return to council for your consideration. So as you know, Urban Systems was contracted to help staff complete the secondary suite study. Dan Wong, who is a principal with Urban Systems, is here tonight to walk council through the process to date. And with that, I will turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen. Can you hear me, Your Worship?
We can, Mr. Wong, and welcome to our meeting.
Great, thank you very much. And also, is the presentation on your screen?
The presentation is up on our screens. Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Well, good evening, Your Worship, members of council. My name is Dan Wong. I'm a senior planner and partner with Urban Systems in Victoria, and I live on McNeil Avenue in Oak Bay. I'm pleased to be back in front of council virtually to present the draft strategy for the secondary suite study for review and comment in advance of us going out for additional public consultation in the coming weeks. As noted in our previous discussion in November, there are a number of policy and regulatory considerations related to secondary suites, which are identified in the draft strategy as well as the staff report. We look forward to the conversation this evening. Next slide, please. As a reminder, our work on implementing secondary suites is guided by the official community plan policy, which states, develop a policy and regulatory framework to permit secondary suites as a way of providing affordable housing. At the time when the OCP was developed in 2014, and ever more today in 2021, the District of Oak Bay and Capital Region is facing a significant shortage of diverse, affordable housing options. In addition to the housing crisis, we also applied a sustainability lens, as secondary suites provide additional housing without increasing the building area footprint. There is also the social equity lens, as secondary suites provide an opportunity for aging in place. During the initial public consultation, we heard from a number of Oak Bay residents who would like to be able to stay in their house as they age by living in the smaller secondary suite and renting out the remainder of the larger house. Finally, there's the economic lens, as secondary suites may act as a potential mortgage helper to help reduce the financial challenges of entry into the Oak Bay housing market. Next slide, please. I thought it would be appropriate to put into context what we mean by secondary suites within Oak Bay compared to what exists today. By definition, a secondary suite is a separate dwelling unit with a separate entrance. It is located somewhere within a single detached dwelling, but does not necessarily have to be located in the basement. Specifically for this study, secondary suites within an accessory building, such as a garden suite or a laneway home, are not being considered at this time. Contrary to what some may believe, Oak Bay currently does not allow secondary suites or basement suites in its zoning bylaw. Boarding uses are currently allowed within a single detached dwelling, but these are based upon a shared kitchen and a shared entrance. It is not considered a separate dwelling. Next slide. It has been a bit of a journey on this project, but we feel like we are gaining momentum to complete our report in the coming months. We began in the fall of 2018 with background review, community policy context, and staff workshops. Our initial community engagement was launched in spring of 2019 with detailed policy and regulatory analysis and community comparisons, which continued through 2019. The project was then delayed for the housing needs report, which I do have a separate slide on. Tonight, we are presenting the draft strategy for Council's information in advance of us going out for additional community engagement in January and February. The final strategy is anticipated to be presented back to Council in March of 2021. Next slide, please. So the housing needs report from February 2020 highlights a number of factors which contribute to the current housing challenges within Oak Bay. For example, the number of primary rental units, that is purpose-built rental, has remained stagnant for the past 10 years. This has resulted in a rental vacancy rate in Oak Bay, which is critically low, 0.2% in October 2019. For reference, a healthy rental environment is somewhere between 3% to 5% vacancy rate. This is something that Oak Bay hasn't seen since 2012. In addition to purpose-built rental, there are an estimated 750 secondary rental units in Oak Bay. That is rented houses, rented condos, and rented secondary suites. Based on this figure, as well as data from BC Assessment, there are an estimated 500 to 750 unregulated secondary suites currently in Oak Bay. The Housing Needs Report projects that an additional 290 studio and one-bedroom units are needed over the next 5 years to address population growth and demand from 2019 to 2024. This also does not include the estimated 178 units in this category to address the existing latent demand between 2016 and 2019. So therefore, the total studio one-bedroom demand is actually closer to about 468 units. Therefore, secondary suites play a critical role in meeting the demand for affordable rental housing in Oak Bay. Next slide, please. As part of this project, initial community consultation was conducted in the spring and summer of 2019 with open houses, pop-up booths, and a MetroQuest survey. Detailed survey results are provided in the draft strategy, and similar to previous discussions within the community, there is both support and opposition to secondary suites in Oak Bay. Overall feedback is generally leaning towards support for secondary suites based on the principles of providing affordable housing, diversity of the housing stock, and financial considerations. Opposition to suites is based on potential impacts to neighborhood character, parking, increased density, and health and safety issues. Overall, there was support for additional regulations. However, it was noted that the regulations should not be overly restrictive. Otherwise, non-compliance would continue and they would remain unregulated. Next slide. At the November meeting, we had a discussion with council about the policy considerations for new as well as existing suites. Applying policies and regulations to new secondary suites aligns with current OCP policy and the housing needs report, and provides the opportunity for the new units to conform with required regulations that are put in place. With regard to existing secondary suites, as noted, they are currently unregulated and are addressed by district staff on a complaint-driven basis. Introducing a formal program for legalizing existing suites would provide an opportunity for existing suites to comply with district bylaws and regulations as applicable. But as noted during public engagement, careful consideration of the policy and regulatory impacts is required, as it may have the opposite impact and continue to drive the issue underground. It is a fine balance indeed. Next slide. Regulatory considerations were also discussed at the November meeting and are detailed in the draft strategy and staff report. I won't go over them in detail, but as you recall, considerations include zoning, definitions, lot size, unit size, siting, floor area, and owner occupancy, parking regulations, which is the potential for requiring an additional off-street parking, registration and licensing, which is tracking through a formal registration system and or business licensing program. The BC Building Code was recently changed to provide alternative compliance standards for suites, which we discussed last November, as well as infrastructure discussions. And it's noted by the engineering department that secondary suites have a limited impact on utilities like water, sewer, drainage, or solid waste. Next slide, please. Putting all this together, there is a regulatory spectrum of attributes related to secondary suites that the community and eventually council will need to take into consideration. These attributes can vary across the spectrum from lesser to more stringent regulations. Based on best practices and experiences in other communities, the more difficult it is to legalize secondary suites, the less likely the uptake will be for existing unregulated suites. Finding the appropriate balance of regulatory levers will be a key to the District of Oak Bay in managing the effectiveness of its secondary suite process while tackling the affordable housing crisis within the capital region. Next slide. So based on this spectrum of attributes, we have developed a series of 6 sample scenarios to provide a scope of how suites could be regulated in Oak Bay, ranging from least regulated under scenario A to most regulated under scenario F. The scenario tables are outlined in the draft strategy and the staff report, and we won't go through them in detail during this presentation, but happy to discuss with council. Each scenario has varying and increasing impacts on a number of categories or attributes, such as zoning, as mentioned, land use, parking, and owner occupancy, enforcement, registration, and resource implications. And the regulations could be applied to new and existing suites, new suites only, or existing suites only. The scenarios will be utilized as part of our upcoming consultation with the community for future review and consideration by council as part of the final report. And the next slide, please. As part of this study, we conducted a bit of research on a number of comparable communities. This included Sydney, Esquimalt, Saanich, Chilliwack, and West Vancouver. While every community has its own unique circumstances, most of the comparison communities have the following regulations. For zoning, it's generally less regulatory in nature. All of the communities allow suites as an as-of-right permitted use. For parking, most of the comparison communities require 1 additional off-street parking space. For owner occupancy, the majority require owner occupancy in either the principal dwelling or the suite. Enforcement is maintained on a complaint-based approach with voluntary compliance. And for registration, generally no registration or business licensing is required. Only West Vancouver required registration. Next slide, please. With respect to community consultation, we will be utilizing the district's Bang the Table platform for community engagement. We're still working through the details, but it will include a virtual open house on the engagement platform, a survey, as well as a series of frequently asked questions, in addition to the draft strategy and previous presentation materials on the engagement platform. We're also discussing with staff about creating a community newsletter for wider distribution. Following the engagement process, we will summarize all of the public input and make final revisions to the strategy, including recommendations. It will also include implementation considerations for the potential scenario or scenarios, including implementation timing, staff resources, and broader financial impacts. As noted, we hope to present the final report back to Council in March 2021. And the final slide. With that, I would like to thank you again for your time and attention tonight, as well as thank all district staff for their cooperation and contributions to this project. We look forward to the upcoming community consultation, and we are grateful for the opportunity to assist the District of Oak Bay on this important initiative. Thank you very much, Your Worship. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wong. Ms. Jensen, was there anything else you wish to come back to?
No, I believe Mr. Wong has covered everything quite nicely. At this point in time, we would just be looking to council if you had any questions or comments on the upcoming consultation.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a couple of areas that probably are worthwhile for some feedback here. And it's an opportunity to ask some questions as well, of course, of staff and Mr. Wong. But, you know, many of those details will probably come at the next phase. But there are those multiple columns. I think I'd be curious if there's any that council wishes to eliminate or to add to those, just so we're being as broad as possible in our consultation, but not providing so much information that people don't have a chance to kind of narrow their commentary. Councillor Ney, I think I saw your hand up.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess this is to probably to Mr. Huang, I guess. Thank you very much for the report, and it's really a nice report with lots of ways of looking at this, and a nice way to present all the features of this program, and some nice research on what other communities have done and whatnot. So thank you very much for this, and thank you for the presentation. Thank you to staff for the nice, clear summary report as well. So the first question I have is with regards to the actual consultation that's coming up. I just want to know, you've said that you're going to be doing an open house survey, facts and responses to questions and community newsletter. And I'm wondering how you, or if there's anything you intend to do to ensure that that there's a voice for everybody in this consultation. There's a sense out there, I don't know how well founded it is, but just anecdotally it seems to be so, that many people who are not in favor of secondary suites will certainly show up to and respond to surveys, but for people who are either renters and living in the community, or for individuals who currently have a secondary suite and would like to remain under the radar, may not participate in fear of being exposed or bringing attention to their situation. So I'm wondering if you could just speak to that, please.
Yeah, Mr. Wong, can you address any Councillor Ney's question? Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Ney. Certainly, in the first round of consultation, we were definitely alive to the privacy considerations and the anonymity of this topic that we were asking actually people last time. Do you have a secondary suite, or do you know somebody on the block that has one? And so, ensuring the anonymity through the survey process again will be critical in getting as honest and as open a conversation that we can. So we'll be working to staff to ensure that that the surveys are, when they're completed, that they are private, and that they remain anonymous. And so it's certainly a challenge in the day of COVID to, because people will be submitting electronically, although we will potentially have opportunities to fill the surveys out in hard copies and drop those off as well too. And Ms. Jensen is nodding, so I was kind of asking her that question. We're still kind of working out those details. But yes, we do want to ask those questions, those sensitive questions to the community, and then need to make sure that we respect privacy and anonymity to make sure that we get a fulsome response from the community. So I'm not sure if Ms.
So,
Jensen
yep,
got
that's
it.
helpful. Thank you very much. I guess the other side of it is, and I certainly don't need to dig into a lot of detail about your methodology, but while protecting privacy and anonymity, the other side of that is, how do you ensure that these are all people and obey responding to the questionnaire? I mean, I appreciate the challenge, but I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, please.
And Mr. Wong?
During the last consultation, I mean, we asked the question, do you live in Oak Bay? And yes or no, and whereabouts in Oak Bay do you live? And so we trust the process and trust that those are answering are answering, to the best of their ability. So in our experience, we've done a number of these as well too. And we find that most people generally, if they know that it's going to be anonymous, that they will answer. To the best of their ability. One of the challenges, and I know it was noted last time, was actually people submitting more than one response. And that's probably something that we would need to, look at as well too. We've, in 25 years, I've only had one experience where we were able to kind of identify multiple submissions from the same IP address. But in the grand scheme of things, it made the difference of like 0.5 of one, half of 1% of an issue. So that's another thing to balance, ensuring that people respond, but at the same time, ensuring that we manage potential for multiple responses from the same IP address.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Wong.
you. May I have another?
You
couple
may.
more
I'm
questions.
hoping, we just got a question which voting tabulation machines they're using here to make sure we're getting a. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Okay. Just one other question around your methodology. Looks like you're consulting with your open house survey and answering questions, but with the community newsletter, could you explain what's going to be the content of that and what its purpose is?
Mr. Wong?
Sorry, can we just confirm, you're talking about the content that we're going to present as part of the public consultation?
Yeah, I understood there were 4 strategies under the community consultation, of which one was a community newsletter.
Okay, thank you. Through your worship, so if I can just maybe point you to page 5 of the staff report, there are a number of activities that we're going to undertake to try to get as much participation from the community as possible. So we will definitely be using an online engagement platform through Bang the Table to ask a series of questions from the community. We really want to gauge where the community would fit on that spectrum that we've introduced through the draft strategy. So asking questions to the community about both the attributes and what they think of those various pieces through the zoning or the parking or lot area or those kinds of attributes, as well as how do they see them fitting together. So now trying to take a look at where they would land on the spectrum, recognizing that each step along the way, there are various implications attached to those. So it's a little bit of educating the community at the same time about what the impacts of some of those might be. To try and get as much impact as possible, we will be advertising this in the local newspapers. As well, we'll provide some of the background information on what's been done to date, as well as ask those same questions through that newsletter that we're going to distribute throughout the community. So that will incorporate some of those survey questions as well for people who aren't able to go online. That's not usually a high response rate, but we do need to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate. So we'll be distributing that either through the local newspaper or through Canada Post to try to capture every single household in the community. We'll also be updating our website to make sure that people have up-to-date information, as well as using social media to try to capture as many people as possible.
I just have two very quick questions left.
Go ahead, Councillor Nay.
Okay, thank you. It's not so much, it's sort of related indirectly to the community consultation with regards to a couple of the so-called attributes that you're referring to. First of all, just for clarification, your scenarios that are laid out, scenarios A to F, that you've presented to us here in the staff report, are those, is that format the format that will be used in the consultation, or is that just for our information? Is this a tool to be used in the community consultation, these scenarios? I was just wondering.
Mr. Wong?
Through your worship, Councillor Nay, yes, it will be. I mean, that is certainly the spectrum of you know, the potential spectrum of regulations that the municipality could consider. You know, we will be using the survey to both inform the community, you know, educate the community about some of the challenges and complexities of, you know, a potential secondary suite program, and then just to get a different set of ideas from the community as to what they think about each of the scenarios. It won't necessarily be a vote for this one or vote for that one. It will be trying to tease out from the community, what do they like about those scenarios and what are some of the challenges. And so it's it definitely won't be per se a popularity contest to say, but at the same time, we will hope to try and get a flavor from the community back to council, where the community kind of sits on that level of spectrum from kind of least restrictive to most restrictive.
Okay, thank you. I must, that's helpful to hear how you're using it as a tool. I must say, just myself, and I've thought about this stuff quite a bit over the last 10 years, but I did find it somewhat complex, and I can't imagine for myself. It's a lot of information to put together at one go, and not to mention being in a public situation. But I presume you know what you're doing here. I'm not questioning that at all. It's just that I do find that kind of complex. I'll leave that to you. But two very quick questions I have then, and then I'll pass it on to my colleagues. But one has to do with the owner-occupier attribute. I'm just wondering, I've heard different rumors of this, and I don't know the answer to it, but were that to be a part of the program, is that an enforceable a feature of a program, legally enforceable? If it was written into the bylaw, I've understood that it can be challenged and overturned, but I don't know. It's a question.
Mr. Wong or Ms. Jensen, do you have an answer for that?
Thank you. Through your worship, we do have the ability to include that as a requirement of the program. It really comes down to ensuring that we are addressing what the intent is behind that as clearly as possible. So yes, it is something that we can do.
Okay, and then finally, the one attribute about changing or creating limitations around the unit size restrictions. As I understood in your report, and as you've spoken to before, the building code has changed around that. And I was wondering, are we able to override what the building code permits in a bylaw, so we can constrain that building code? Is that how it works?
So thank you for the question, through your worship. So the building code used to have a maximum of 40% of the gross floor area of the house, up to a maximum of 90 square meters. And so you couldn't even, as a municipality, write a bylaw that created a larger suite. And now all of that has been removed from the building code. So it really is at the discretion of the municipality as to whether you want to regulate any size at all, whether you want to just regulate a percentage, or whether you want to regulate a percentage and a size. And so if you were silent on that, Councillor Nay, then somebody could come in and build, as large a secondary suite as possible. If you went, one of the options was you could not have a maximum size, but go to 40%. And so if it was a 2,000 square foot house, 40% of that would be 500 square feet. Sorry, I'm still in imperial as opposed to metric. And then another alternative I think we had, it was potentially a 40% to a maximum of square footage. I think we chose 150 square meters, which was about 1,600 square feet, which is quite large. But at the same time, some of the houses in Oak Bay are quite large. You have 5,000 and greater size houses, up to 10,000 square foot houses in Oak Bay. So it is something that we probably think we should consider, even though the building code has removed that.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. I have Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Green, and then Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Jensen and Mr. Wang, for these reports. I think Councillor Nay has covered a lot of similar items to what I wanted to ask about, but I will just ask about then, I'll focus on some of the items in the report and if I'm interpreting them right when I look at the report, because I think that's how others may also look at them. In the report, when we talk about the housing inventory, and certainly there's on page 11 in the report, 14 on the, if you're looking at it on the PDF, there's the secondary suite estimates, and as Mr. Wong said, the total requirement that was in the housing needs report was about 467 units by 2024. If I looked at table 8, which is the comparative of ranges that are listed for what has happened in other communities, it shows that the uptake in secondary suites was about 30% up to 70% of private dwellings with suites. So for Oak Bay, as I'm reading this, that could mean increasing the inventory by 1,000 to 1,500 if I looked at 20 to 30% on 516 or 5,116 private dwellings. So that could be 1,000 to 1,500 in addition to the 500 to 700 that already exist, which could potentially significantly be more than would be required, although perhaps in the overall region not a something that is acceptable or not. Am I reading that correctly? Is that what could be anticipated here if it was a comparative to the other districts?
I'll give that to Mr. Wong, but Ms. Jensen, you can jump in as well. Do you have a sense of expectations?
Through your worship, I'll start and I'll turn to Ms. Jensen. I mean, we look to the housing needs report, I guess, to look at the projections, and that's where that number of the of the 470 comes from. The comparison communities, each of those have their own unique circumstances, and so the uptake in those communities, I probably wouldn't necessarily do a one-to-one type relationship between those other communities with respect to the number of units themselves. The comparison communities are probably used more for their experiences in legalization and then some of the regulations that they put in place. And so I think it's still fair to say that the between the latent demand and the 5-year demand of close to 500 kind of studio 1-bedroom units is probably a reasonable estimate on top of the existing 500 to 700. And so overall, that works out to somewhere between 1,000 to 1,200, studio 1-bedroom suites, of existing and new. So that would be kind of my comment in relation to the comparison communities. I'm not sure if Ms. Jensen has anything else to add.
And again, I think it comes down to when we come back with the final strategy for council's consideration, depending on the direction the council wants to take, could also influence the take up on any new policies and or regulations that might be in place. Again, I think until we have a bit more information from the community leading into the final strategy, it's difficult to provide what those numbers might look like.
Thank you. I also found it quite interesting under the affordability where the chart on page 5 identified that 14% of owners in Oak Bay exceed the 30% of monthly income for shelter, because I'm presuming that those would be owners most likely to consider secondary suites. And if you look at the total number of private dwellings we have, 14% of that number is 700, just over 700 suites, which is almost what we estimate we have now. So I'm looking, I think I have always thought of affordability being the affordability of the suites, but really this, when I looked at the correlation of those numbers, it was more the affordability of the house for the homeowner than for the person renting the suite. And that may be coincidental, but I don't know that I believe so much in coincidence. I think that there is some correlation between the 14% of owners where their monthly housing costs exceed that 30%. Any comments on that, perhaps, Mr. Wong?
Mr. Wong?
Yeah, I mean, the two reports are related, but I guess they are different. But there's there is some correlation, whether it's not direct or not. There is an affordability challenge within Oak Bay, as with other communities within the capital region, and it's not just an affordability for renters; it's an affordability for homeowners. And so as some of those percentages is that 14% of owners who can't, who are spending more than 30% of their income on rent, on housing. Could a secondary suite provide additional revenue? Yes, it could. So is it a direct relationship? It's hard to say, but definitely, the affordability challenges, even for homeowners, could move some towards finding, opportunities for additional income, and secondary suites are part of that.
Thank you. One part of this, and looking at these, that I struggle with, and it's a question I've been asked, and certainly I don't have the answer to, so hopefully I can get that tonight. But again, when we looked at the comparative studies for other communities where suites have been approved to be regulated, there's been a low take-up in registrations, particularly in existing homes versus new homes, and I guess that makes sense. It's much easier to develop a new home to be compliant with codes for that, and so there was a prevalence of unregulated suites, and in many of the communities, I've noticed on the charts that are provided, the enforcement is really minimal or complaint driven. And so could you help me understand that legislatively, what is the actual difference between a bylaw program established to allow suites with no enforcement of those standards so that you get a prevalence of unregulated suites as opposed to having no program? It's really, I think, something that I hear asked all the time, and so I'm trying to struggle why other communities would put the programs in place and then have no regulation.
Mr. Wong, can you address that? Certainly, the differentiation between the new and the existing.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. So the regulation is a zoning regulation, as you know. So right now, secondary suites are not permitted as a use. Two ways to allow that use. One is an as of right use, and so a lot of the comparison communities have just said, we will allow secondary suites, within existing single family or dwellings, if they meet whatever conditions are applied. There is the opportunity and to consider just allowing new construction to have that secondary suite, by which as an as of right use, then the existing 500 to 700 suites would have to have some process to either legalize and or zone that use. And so that is definitely a consideration. The communities that have allowed secondary suites as an as of right use, so then the use itself is allowed, because if the use wasn't allowed and the complaint was lodged, the remedy for the municipality would be to require a rezoning if you allowed that in the community. And so if that use is allowed, as a lot of these communities have allowed those uses as of right, then the second question is, do you want to have a licensing or registration process, by which you can at least create a list of where the suites are, all the way up to potentially requiring a business license to have that. And as shown in the community comparisons, it definitely has been a challenge for all of the communities to get buy-in for that list for a number of reasons. And even more so to try and get business licensing, or formal licensing and registration. And so some communities have created a pilot time frame to say, if you register within, the first year, you only have to comply with A and B, but you don't necessarily have to comply with C and D. Some communities have done that. Others have, like Chilliwack, have actually taken the stance of, I think we put it in the comparison table, of a non-enforcement role, actually. And so if you put your suite on the list, we will log that as being in existence, and then we will not enforce after that. And so that is another unique circumstance as well too. So we can certainly unpack this discussion, in March with the direction of council, depending on which direction you're thinking of. But each of them has, if you think this table is complex, there's a discussion under every single item within this table as well too. So I think once we get further into, a scenario or scenarios that council may be thinking based on input from the community, we can start unpacking some of these details as council starts considering how to implement this. So.
And the question just about the variance, I guess, in the programs, and there's obviously a wide gap between what people want. There are those who think, it can run the gamut from I don't want regulation at all to people who want full legislated enforcement, and so somewhere between perhaps lies the answer. But nevertheless, we will have both sides of that too. So if I look really at the kind of the full scale program, and I consider that because in everything that has been discussed with the community to date, we have certainly focused on the benefit to having these programs are better compliance with health and safety for the occupants of the suites, and so I take it that would require some type of registration or compliance at some stage in the program. And when I look at this and where the dollar signs are, and they go from $1 sign up to more dollar signs, but I guess initially, because we have so many existing suites also in Oak Bay, in older properties, there could be a cost range to doing this in the range of $100,000 to $200,000 for the program, but that could, over time, once the program is established, could come down on the sliding scale till where it was a much lesser cost as time went on. Is that based on, Mr. Wong, perhaps on your experience with other communities, is that what has transpired with, rather than the full annual cost every year forever after for the program, that perhaps the higher startup cost and then the reduced cost going forward.
Mr. Wong?
That's probably a reasonable observation. There's certainly, again, depending on how the community wishes to launch its program, those that have gone with a registration and a harder enforcement, as Councillor mentioned, up to 2 FTEs, the costs are commensurate. But as especially those that have gone through full rezonings or spot rezonings, each of those also then requires a specific rezoning of work. We've worked with communities that have required that as well too. They would do that for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then they put it into their zoning bylaw as an as of right use, and so that then has saved staff time and resources as well too. The current challenge you have right now, why you're not getting compliance is because the use is not currently allowed in the zoning bylaw, and so you can, again, the one scenario where you allow the use and then you still work with the community on compliance. And compliance is not going to happen overnight, just given the age of some of the homes. And so there's still going to be an expense required in many existing homes that are built, that the building department has been working with, and the fire department, to ensure minimum health and safety requirements. But, even though the building code has been relaxed somewhat 2 years ago, there still will be a cost to create the fire separations required, to create the connected smoke detectors, to ensure that there's proper access and egress, to ensure your windows are large enough as well too. So it's really hard to, some units may be able to do it for a couple $1,000s, others maybe tens of thousands of dollars. So it's really hard to know exactly how many of those 500 to 700 units in Oak Bay will actually comply, just given the variation in magnitude of the potential costs to bring it up to code.
Thank you. And the last question that I have, hopefully either Ms. Jensen or Mr. Wong will be able to shed some light on it. As a potential renter, other than a landlord who is registered with the BC Landlords Association, how would a potential renter confirm if the suite that they are interested in renting is actually registered or in compliance with codes?
Mr. Wong?
I'll start, and then maybe Ms. Jensen. I mean, certainly, we would encourage all suite owners to bring their units up to code, and then by doing that, they then would apply for a building permit. And then once that building permit has been approved and construction created, then there's a record. So you don't necessarily have to create a registration system in Oak Bay to show that those meet code, because you have a building permit, and so that owner can say, yeah, I have an approved building permit in 2021. I now have not only is the use legal in the zoning bylaw, but my building permit shows that I've brought it up to code for secondary suite. And so, like you say, there is a pathway that you do not have to go through registration, but can still satisfy the BC building code, as well as the tenancy considerations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have Councillor Green, then Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, and through you, Mayor, to Ms. Jensen and Mr. Wong, thank you very much. This is an incredibly comprehensive report, 51 pages, and I learned a lot as well when I was reading through it, so I thank you for that. Just a couple of questions. The first one is, in your experience, Mr. Wong and Ms. Jensen, in a community where the suites are not recognized and regulated, is the municipality exposed legally for any liability should there be injuries or death resulting from a fire or accident in a home with an unregulated suite? Are you aware of any liability issues for a municipality that fails to come to grips with suites in their community?
I'm not, and like I say, it's to the extent of the licensing that you have. Again, those communities that require, like West Vancouver, that actually requires you know, the business license, I guess it comes down to once you are aware of the situation, what regulations do you actually have to comply to those? And so the 4 communities that don't have a registration system, you know, they would work with the homeowner to, you know, comply with the BC Building Code as best they can. But, you know, the use itself is still conforming. So I think it's like with any other regulation that you put in place, as long as you're working, you know, towards, you know, legalization on, you know, and if it's on a complaint basis, then once you get that, you know, what are the procedures by which you receive that complaint, by which you then act on that. So I think if you're following that, then I think you would be covered. But I'm not a lawyer.
No,
Don't try to
I know, and that's true.
I'll turn it to Ms. Jensen to see about that.
I was just wondering if you were aware of any situations like that. Thank you. So we have consulted with the community in Oak Bay in 2010, 2013, 2019, and now we will be consulting in 2021. And I just wanted to ask, and I really appreciate the fact that you are doing consultation again, what in your view will be the differences between the upcoming consultation as compared with the other 3 opportunities that we've had to speak with the community about secondary suites?
Thank you, through your worship to Councillor Green. When we started this project in 2018, it was under, you know, the policy change of the OCP, and it wasn't it wasn't an if secondary suites in the policy. It was a how to make that happen. And so when we started our conversation in 2018, we said, what are some of the issues and challenges and opportunities with suites as we work towards, you know, a potential legalization of secondary suites. And that's what we got back in our first round of consultation. And that's now how we created these multitudes of potential scenarios. You know, it's all of those elements. And so this consultation again is again, you know, if I'm to be blunt, not an if suites are allowed, but how would we actually implement under these scenarios? You as a community member, you as a taxpayer, seeing some of these resource implications, where do you see yourself, you know, within this scenario, set of different scenarios with respect to how it impacts you as a homeowner, you as a neighborhood resident, but also you as a taxpayer with respect to some of these implications. And so, you know, so we're kind of moving down the funnel as far as implementation goes. And then it really is then up to council when we come back to then decide on a pathway forward.
Thank you very much. And that's really helpful because I think that will help to frame the questions for the next consultation. And this information, while complex in places, as Councillor Ney pointed out, it's very, very helpful. I don't think, I certainly in my experience living in Oak Bay, haven't had such concrete guidance before in tackling this issue. And as you know, it's been a thorny issue for a long time, unfortunately. Just one other question to Ms. Jensen, through you, Mayor. Ms. Jensen, if the zoning bylaw review isn't going to occur, I think it was 2023 when I last looked, this would, secondary suites, if this council chose to move down, you know, whatever pathway is chosen, it will require some revision or changes to our zoning bylaws. Do you foresee that happening before 2023? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but am I right to assume that if we come to grips with secondary suites in Oak Bay, that those changes to the bylaw would occur prior to 2023?
And I might go to Mr. Anderson for that answer because he's sort of got the overall responsibility for the pieces. Mr. Anderson, are you on the phone as well?
Yes, Your Worship. Can everybody hear me?
We can, thank you.
Yes. So, Councillor Green is correct that the intent is for that comprehensive zoning bylaw update, that if there were changes that would come from the housing framework, that could and would be incorporated as part of that zoning bylaw update. What I will say is that if there's direction to proceed with any of these individual initiatives, such as secondary suites, in terms of zoning bylaw update, staff could certainly proceed with those if that was council's direction, to sort of advance, if you will, any specific particular housing type or component that needed to be implemented through our zoning bylaw.
Thank you very much. No, that's helpful. That's helpful. Thank you. And I guess my last question is, would it be possible for council, through you, Mayor, to Mr. Wong and Ms. Jensen, would it be possible for us to see a draft of the questions that will be part of the consultation this spring? Would that be possible? Thank you.
Ms. Jensen, Mr. Wong?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just so you're aware, once we've finished our presentation here tonight, leading into going out to the community, we will be consulting with the Advisory Planning Commission. And as part of that, we could certainly send an email out to council advising as to what the final consultation is going to look like.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, because what often happens is we end up fielding questions from the community about, well, why was that question asked, or what was the intent of the questionnaire or the survey, or so it's really helpful if we are at least just aware of the framework that is being used. That's really helpful. So thank you so much. That sounds great. I have no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you through you to staff and Urban Systems. It's a fantastic report. I very much appreciate reading it, and I had some good encouragement on reading up on the latest changes to the building code. So thank you for that. So a couple of questions, and I'll try to keep them succinct. I'll speak first to one of the council priorities that we're currently tracking, priority 2020-23, and I'll just read it, which is to enhance enforcement of short-term rentals. We'll probably be looking at that in the 2021 budget process. I'm sure our CAO is definitely looking forward to our upcoming priority sessions and all the new things we want to spend money on. But one of the things that was suggested, for example, in Scenario D, was that it might be up to 1 to 2 full-time employees might be required to do, for example, Scenario D, which is more of a regulatory approach, a hands-on approach. Just wondering, with respect to enforcement, I presume those 1 or 2 full-time employees could do more than just secondary suites work. So just the question through to you to ask whether, for example, short-term rentals enforcements or other bylaw enforcements, could those sort of things be done at the same time? Or is it anticipated for Scenario D that it would just be dedicated?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Obviously, a bit of an order of magnitude type estimate, but perhaps Mr. Anderson is best suited to answer that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council may recall that direction was given for staff to add additional enforcement with respect to Airbnb. What we're working on is adding enforcement staff that would, in fact, be able to take on some of the other enforcement functions within the district as part of that initiative. So I think the short answer is there may be opportunities for what we would have in place as a full-time enforcement official to perhaps become involved with respect to this. But as I think it was mentioned earlier, what we've given here at this point in time is really order of magnitude and making assumptions about what type of program we'd be delivering in terms of particularly existing suites. So I think there may be an opportunity, but I still would caution that we're at a point here where those estimates are pretty general at this stage, just an order of magnitude as mentioned. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Very much appreciate that. Thank you very much. And just wanted to ensure that, certainly in the public engagement aspects, that we remind anyone who's looking at or considering a secondary suite that there is no intention to make these living dwellings available for something like short-term rentals. The intention is for long-term rentals. Just wanted to ensure that that would be part of the public engagement. The second question I've got has to do with things like solid waste fees and other fees. We've done a really good job at in the last little while, I think, as a council, at trying to make our fees a little bit more easier to understand. And I noticed, for example, with the latest solid waste fee that just went live, that brings in this wonderful additional aspects of for our composting. It's about if I remember correctly, $265 per unit is what's being charged. So the question I have for you has to do with the concept of a unit. The building code is very clear. There's a dwelling unit, which is the main part of the house, and then there's a secondary suite, which is a separate thing. We might possibly be able to set this up and have a solid waste fee per living quarters, whatever we want to call it? In other words, could the secondary suite itself also generate a solid waste fee for the district, since they'll be generating garbage, et cetera, et cetera?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I'm not sure we've gotten into that much detail on the pieces, but I think it's a good question to ask if that's been looked at, or if that would form part of the, if it hasn't been looked at, where that would fit into the overall discussion. Mr. Anderson probably is, or Ms. Jensen?
Yeah, I'm unable to look into the other office to see if people are looking at me to consider the answer, but I will go ahead and the basis, as may be noted in the report, is that currently we charge based on usage for example, for solid waste. I will note that comparison communities, for the most part, did not establish separate fees related to that. And then I guess the final point on this is that we haven't investigated whether or not that's something we would do or could do with respect to secondary suites, something I think we can look at as we get closer to our final strategy. Thank you.
A couple more questions, if I may, please. So with respect to either fees or possibly owner occupancy in terms of enforcement, if we did not do, for example, a license or some sort of a permit process, what might be the consideration for how we could enforce this, other than maybe putting something on title?
Mr. Wong, I'll go to you in terms of enforcement portions of this. Do you have a sense of that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, your enforcement could potentially be on a complaint-driven basis, and then once the complaint is lodged, just as it is today, right now, if a complaint is lodged, both the use and occupancy are not lawful at this stage. If you change your zoning, then the use would be a lawful use, and then it would come down to are you conforming to the regulations for building code. And so under the building code provisions, you would have the ability to require those upgrades to take place. Otherwise, that occupancy could cease at that point. The registration itself is really just again, those communities that have thought about registration is truly just that. It's just really a list of those units that have a suite. That in itself isn't really an enforceable venue, as opposed to a business license. And the difference there is, as you're aware, the business license itself is just that, it's a license. And the license itself then potentially could come with a series of requirements. And then if you're not meeting those requirements, then you don't get issued a business license, and then you are then operating without a business license. So there are enforcement opportunities under all of those 6 scenarios. Some are building code only, some of them are zoning related, and some of them are business license or licensing related. And so there are, to Councillor Zelka, there are avenues for enforcement under all the scenarios, just at different levels. And then just to follow up, just on the solid waste, under page 21 of the report, we did in the comparison communities, Chilliwack actually does charge an additional curbside collection fee for the secondary suite. So there is one of the 5 comparison communities that does charge an additional fee for curbside waste collection. And then also Sydney and Esquimalt charge for, ironically, it's provided if you have a legal suite, but an illegal suite may need to pay for a small fee for an additional garbage bin. So Sydney and Esquimalt are acknowledging that you have an illegal suite, they're allowing it, and then you're paying the garbage fee for that. So there's some gray areas there, as you can understand.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Wong. Anything else, Councillor Zelka?
No, but thank you so much for helping to make us all laugh here in a good way. Because definitely, sometimes local authority is a bit gray. It's just the way it is. So thank you for that with respect to the potential enforcement ways of moving forward, and I look forward to diving deeper a bit on that. I do notice, I appreciate the comparables that you provided. One of the comparables that I have is the city of Delta, north of Swanson and south of Richmond. They have a secondary suite process there. And one of the things that I was hoping that we could do, since one of the projects that's on the books is to have building permit lookups, whatever, I forget what we're going to call the name of that project. But eventually, we're going to be helping to encourage all of our citizens to go to our website, and maybe through Tempest, people can look up building permit information. The development tracker, thank you very much. So in line with something like the development tracker, I noticed City of Delta has a secondary suites permit lookup. For those nosy neighbors who want to know whether that thing next door is legal or not, it would be a very inexpensive way of doing that. So is that being anticipated for something like this, or would it depend on our level of registration and enforcement?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I have a feeling that would come later in the process to get to that level of detail. But Mr. Wong, any comments on that as an option?
Your Worship, it's Bruce Anderson here.
Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, apologies. I wasn't able to hear a good portion of that, but I believe it was whether or not we could have suites, permitted suites identified in our development tracker once we have that in place. And I would say we could potentially do that. We would certainly need to have A, suites permitted, and B, the tracker in place before we can get there. But there's potential for that to be in there is my short answer. Thank you.
Thank you,
Last
Mr.
question,
Anderson.
if I may.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciate. This is a fascinating topic for me, and an area where I know there is a demand out there to look at this. Last question is: some other districts have taken a temporary use permit approach, as a way of sort of, at least with respect to their pilots. As a way of testing the waters before, shall we say, committing. Might that be something we might consider, or is that potentially on the table, or is this too early to look at an approach yet?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Not legally allowed in Oakby at the current time, but could be changeable by us, obviously. Mr. Anderson?
Yes, Your Worship. Did I understand that if we were to undertake a pilot program, would we use temporary use permits for that?
That was essentially the question.
I'm not familiar with that use of temporary use permits. So it's something we could investigate, but it's not something that I've seen.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity for questions.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other questions arising here? Members of Council? Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. Possibly a question to staff, or possibly to yourself. Are staff seeking at this time, because this is now going out to public engagement, are staff seeking input from council at this time as per what the content of what is presented, as far as commentary on what is laid out in the report and what might go forward in terms of the content here?
I think that's in keeping with what we're asking for. This is sort of a governance touch point where we're looking at what's being cobbled together, it's terrible. It's been assembled very professionally, and will go out to the public as part of the review process. So if there's anything you wish to add or remove, this is a chance to raise it as a possibility.
Thank you, Your Worship. So to that end, I would propose that in terms of the scenarios that are being presented here, my preference would be, for the sake of both simplicity and because I don't feel that it fits, I would like to see us omit scenario E, which is presented in this plan. And scenario E essentially is, and I understand why it's included here for completeness, but scenario E is essentially the pilot program. So essentially implementing any one of options A through F, but doing it on a pilot basis. And as is pointed out in the report, this does not, to my mind, meet the intent of what was written into the OCP. It unduly limits the option for implementation, and it does raise the prospect of potentially orphaning. If we chose a pilot area or a pilot time frame, it would potentially orphan certain suites that were in the community. And in short, to be blunt, this is presented as a pilot to essentially trial the concept of secondary suites. The suites are in the community. We have it in our OCP. We've made a commitment to find a way to make this work for community. So I'm not of the mind to engage in a trial, but rather to just get on with it.
So what I'll do procedurally here, Councillor Appleton, I think it's a valid point that you're making, but what I'll do is we'll finish up with questions, and what I'll allow is a motion to remove that as a piece, and then we can have a quick debate on that particular item. Because I think those kind of suggestions are exactly what we're looking for. Is how can we improve the ability to? It's a complicated topic, and the more we can simplify it, but still leave options is ideal. So, anything else, Councillor Appleton? Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody sitting around the table of your great comments and suggestions. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my area here. Almost all of my questions have been answered as far as liability, non-enforcement, regulation questions, things like that. There are a couple of things that I would like clarification on. I think one is, and probably this question would be directed to Mr. Wong. I think I heard you say in your preamble that in 2019, Oak Bay had a 0.2% vacancy rate. And I know in your report it says that the City of Victoria had a 1% vacancy rate. I'm wondering if you can tell me, and that the average vacancy rate is usually around 3 to 5%. And I'm just wondering if you can tell me what the vacancy rate of the CRD was in that same time frame in 2019, just as a comparison.
Mr. Wong?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Braithwaite, we're practically looking through the housing needs report to see if it's in there. That's the two percentages that Councillor Braithwaite quoted came from the housing needs report, which I was not the author of. And so if we can't find it immediately, we'll definitely get back to you on that one.
Suffice to say, though, it's very low across the region. It's not unique to Oak Bay or Victoria.
Exactly. Yeah.
That would be my statement as well.
And then my other question is, and this is just kind of something that just came to me, was that how is COVID affecting the housing needs within the community? Because I know that based on some of the reports that I've read from real estate people, that people are tending to move out of contained suites and condos and trying to look for single family dwellings now. So I'm just wondering if you have any insight into that.
Mr. Wong, any insights into the broader trends?
Through Your Worship, not definitively that I'd be able to, the only things that I potentially heard anecdotally. I mean, there's still, demand is still high for all forms of real estate at this stage, and my gut actually would tell me that people aren't moving, but again, I couldn't really speak definitively to that.
Thank you. And then on page 3 of the staff report, at the very bottom, the very last sentence, it says, and this is talking about existing secondary suites, it says this could range from voluntary, that the regulatory program for existing secondary suites would provide an opportunity to seek compliance with district bylaws. This could range from voluntary compliance to required compliance and enforcement, and where compliance is not feasible, new policies could provide for an alternative approach. So I'm just wondering if you could just touch on whether or not, what that exactly means. Does that mean, because when I read this, I think, does that mean that if an existing secondary suite doesn't meet building codes, that we would then allow it to be approved if we went down this path?
Yeah, Mr. Wong or Ms. Jensen,
I mean, through your worship, through Councillor Braithwaite, yes, I mean, one of the examples that we used was from Chilliwack, and they have a bit of a tailored policy by exactly that is the case, where they try and try and get voluntary compliance as much as possible. But they've also stated in certain circumstances they would consider if you met a certain time frame that suite is to be in existence, and then they take a policy of non-enforcement. And so I will not get into the legalities of that, but that is the policy that they've chosen, that says if you've declared your suite by, today's date, January the 11th, 2021, we will consider that suite to be in existence and we will not enforce. And so that would require a further discussion if council chose to go down that pathway. But that, like I say, we chose Chilliwack for that reason, that they've chosen some tailored solutions for their community.
Thank you. I appreciate that because again, I look at that, and I know that Councillor Green asked a question around liability as well, and I realize that you said that you're not a lawyer, so I appreciate that as well. But because when I do look at further down in the staff report, it talks about infrastructure on page 4, and it talks about that there's no concern regarding servicing capacity for secondary suites. And I would question that as far as police and fire goes, whether or not there would be a concern regarding the capacity for servicing secondary suites. So that might be an interesting item that'll come up in the public consultation. I think that might be all that I'm going to ask right now. I will touch on, I know that part of the staff request is that we look at those scenarios A to F, and I know that Councillor Appleton already brought up about scenario E. Perhaps prior to him putting some sort of a motion on the table, I might say that when I look at the word pilot, I might consider pilot as something perhaps not as the same as what Councillor Appleton perhaps is looking at it as. I might look at pilot as to, what it could be a pilot that we look at the existing suites to do something with existing suites and not necessarily new suites. So it could be a pilot on asking existing suites to register, et cetera, et cetera. So I would just add that into the conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite, and I think we can get to that. I would be curious, maybe just as a question to Mr. Wong, what was the intention of that column E? Was that a pilot of a subsection of some of these, or a pilot related to a subsection of the community? Because I read it as a subsection of the community as well, but I could be. What was the intention of that?
Through your worship, to your worship, some communities, we just wanted to give the entire spectrum for the community and council for consideration. Councillor Appleton's point is certainly well taken, and in our analysis of the community, the initial thought was, if we, in our initial consultation, if we found out that 90% of the existing suites were in potentially one neighborhood, that may then lend itself potentially to a pilot. But in our summary of the previous consultation, we did find out, for those that responded, that suites are, kind of sprinkled throughout Oak Bay. So in that respect, putting a geographic pilot, even though that is one option, and it has been used in other communities, District of Salish used it, so that, those areas that were closer to UVic, as well as within the urban containment boundary, that was the pilot that they chose as a starting point for secondary suites. Suites are now allowed in a broader area of Salish, but that was the pilot that they started with. So, and then the other option could be if it's just a specific zone, if it was just for the larger lots, or if it was that was a possibility as well too. But again, in the consultation, as mentioned, they're kind of sprinkled out across the community. But I guess the third option for the existing suites, could that be another possibility for a pilot? That's a possibility as well too. So we just wanted to give the entire spectrum of options for consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite. You want to
Thank
follow
you.
up?
Sorry, I have two other things that I just realized. Number one was thank you for including in your report about the, I think it was Kitimat area that through council offers loans to people who are looking to put in a secondary suite. I thought that was really interesting. I would be interested at a future date perhaps to find out how much that cost them or how many people actually utilized that service that they were giving, unless you know off the top of your head.
Through your worship, I don't know off the top of my head, but we can certainly elaborate on that for council when we meet back in March.
Thank you. And then lastly, just going on something that Councillor Zelka mentioned about units as far as solid waste charges for residential units. Interestingly, if we had 1,500 secondary suite units at $265 a unit, that would add about $400,000 into our budget. So that's something to consider as well when we're looking at this.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I have Councillor Green and Zelka wish to speak a second time, but I'm just gonna. I have a couple of questions myself, so I'll jump in here real quickly and ask them. One was just very quickly. I noticed in the options being considered for presentation to the public that the number used for maximum size was 150 square meters, and looking at the comparators, every other place is using still the old provincial restriction of 90 square meters. Is there an argument here to use the 150 as opposed to keeping it at 90 in the query to the public, or perhaps maybe making those options available to the public for query? Mr. Wong?
Through your worship, I'll start, and if Ms. Jensen wants to chime in, because it really was a discussion that we had, between ourselves and staff, and you are correct. Most communities still use the 90 square meters because, they had their suite regulations in place, well before 2018 when the regulations were changed. And so we did toy, with the potential to have 90 square meters, if that was a scenario. But then we also looked at the types of residential units within Oak Bay, and there are some fairly large houses, in that 5 to upwards to 10,000 square feet. And so, was 90 square meters, was that a reasonable amount, given that the BC Building Code removed that? We thought that because they removed it, we suggested that the 90 square meters was probably a bit restrictive, but at the same time, we didn't want it that large. So it really was, your worship, a bit of rule of thumb that said 150 square meters, that's about 1,600 square feet. That's still a pretty big secondary suite. That's potentially a 2-bedroom secondary suite. And that's within I don't know my math, Ms. Jensen,
No, it's good enough. I appreciate that. The
7,000 square foot house, I think, or something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a pretty big house.
It is. Okay. No, thank you for that clarification. I was just, it kind of dovetails into my other observation here is the, in this listing that we have, it's a lot of information, and I'm thinking if people are going through it, I really appreciate the amount of detail in here and the comparators to other jurisdictions, and also just the layout, sort of explaining the differences in options within the zoning, the parking, etc. One option might be, if you're selecting feedback, it's just people, if they're going through and looking at zoning, they can kind of tick the box that they approve, from each of those columns as to where their alliances lie, just to kind of give them a chance to kind of pick and choose off the different menus for that, because I think it would help eliminate some of the confusion about, I have to choose all of this one or all of that one, but there may be some preferences there that come out in that kind of ranking, and maybe things like the maximum size could fit into that too, where people could just sort of select from a range within that. So there's just considerations in terms of actually asking the questions. And the last question I have here is just related to the what really struck me, I didn't realize this under all of the other comparators, was that they didn't differentiate between in-house secondary suites and outbuilding secondary suites in terms of their use. I know we've, by intention, at the start of this, restricted ourselves to only in-house secondary suites, but considering that people may look at converting a garage or some other outbuilding rather than an in-building, is it too late at this point to add that consideration as part of this, or should that remain within the housing framework and would be considered under maybe the similar rules, but under that the broader housing framework for options. Maybe, I'm not sure who that should go to. It's probably more of a Mr. Anderson question than it is a Mr. Wong question.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. Yes, the established terms of reference for the study that's currently underway was very specific and did narrow this and scope it to secondary suites within single-family dwellings or primary dwelling units. I also should note that our neighborhood housing options, where we're looking at infill housing types and opportunities, does include and will include looking at detached suites, so laneway houses, and also the detached or carriage suites and suites in accessory buildings such as garages. So that's the next piece of work that we're looking at. That will include looking at detached suites. Thank you.
Okay, that answers the question sufficiently, I think. I certainly, when I saw it all laid out there, how everybody else did, I thought, oh, that actually makes sense, but I don't want to derail the process we have here, because I think that might just add time unnecessarily. So let's stay on that path. That's the extent of my questions. Thank you for that. I have Councillor Green and then Zelka. Oh, okay, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity for one last question. Has staff considered whether, since many of the scenarios make reference to RS1 through RS5, the uplands regulations and the Oak Bay Special Powers Act, are there any restrictions or any considerations that need to be taken into account for potential secondary suites in those special areas? I was wondering whether they've been considered or not. And if there are, what are the considerations?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Zelka, because I have this tickling feeling at the back of my mind that there may be some special regulations in the uplands. Mr. Anderson or Ms. Jensen, are you aware or have we checked to confirm whether there's any restrictions in the zoning within the uplands?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, there are no restrictions with the Upland Special Powers Act.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
So I'm just imagining a scenario where there's not just one a clothesline, but there's two clotheslines, and then someone's view of the water is impacted. Would we entertain a change of siting and design for something like that?
That's a good philosophical question for this body, not for our consultants. I don't see any. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question around the issue of parking specifically. When it comes to the consultation, you've provided, a useful overview of the issues and considerations in the report around parking. And we also have before us, the way parking is dealt with in these various jurisdictions. Something that was brought up to my attention around the parking from a constituent was the inclusion or the option in the parking feature of this program of offering a parking permit as an alternative to on-site parking. And the reason I'm bringing that, I don't see it here, and I don't know if this is a feature that's in any programs. It's certainly not in the ones you've provided us. But it did make me think about, we're looking at how to deal with parking specifically here, but parking is obviously a complex issue that ties into a system of other issues that go beyond parking on a road, that have to do with the way we regulate parking has spin-off impacts in terms of incentivizing the use of other modalities. And given the complexity, are we, by providing on-site parking, therefore, I don't know, incentivizing car use, or, the idea of providing a permit for people who have an extra car to pay for that, and therefore the extra car is there's a fee for, and disincentivizing car use because there would be a fee to it. I mean, I don't need to get into the complexity. Really what I'm asking you Is there any value in considering that notion? So I just draw on your experience and expertise in this area, whether there's any benefit to doing that.
And I think specifically to the consultation process, if that's going to be included or framed, and maybe I might expand your question if you don't mind slightly, which is also a question in terms of how that parking question is framed. In the report, it's really excellent because it highlights the problems of the more parking you insist on, the less green space there is, the less you have, the more impact it has on the streets and their safety and their use. And so it's not a linear path. So I'm curious about how that question is going to be asked in a way that provides some of that background concisely. Mr. Wong?
Thank you, Worship. Excellent question, excellent and challenging topic, as we all noted. Parking is definitely something that has come up time and time again. And it's on a block by block basis. Some blocks have parking challenges, others don't have those parking challenges. So it is challenging to put broad brush regulations into something that is that may or may not be applicable, across the community. It's also, without further discussion with staff and engineering, we did have that discussion about, we do have an option that has no parking at all. We have an option that says no parking for existing suites, but parking for brand new suites. And then we have an option which is one parking space for new and existing suites. And then as you can tell, as you get further and further down the regulatory spectrum, the compliance is probably going to be less and less because, again, as somebody who lives in Oak Bay, finding that space for that extra parking space is going to be very challenging and could have unintended consequences, as you mentioned, Your Worship, with respect to loss of green space, loss of pervious area, and just the look and feel of the street when there might be lots and lots of parking on the street on a case by case basis. So that is something that I think will require some deeper questioning. And so thank you for that. We'll give it some thought as to how we approach, and unpack this parking and potentially, getting the permit. So one option was if you could require a parking space and then somebody could come in to council for a DVP to vary that requirement. And then council may say, well, look at the street and say there's lots of parking on the street. And so you could apply that, you could allow that variance. Or, you may get to a point where you may be thinking of a residential parking program, which I think is what Councillor Nate was alluding to. And I think that's, part of a larger conversation, which also then has staff and resource questions as well on top of that as well too. So, but it's definitely an interesting topic, and like I say, we'll need to unpack that fulsomely as we go to public consultation.
Okay, I'm very appreciative of you thinking through that in such detail, so thank you, Mr. Wong. So that was any other questions. So Councillor Appleton, you had a suggestion to remove scenario E from the selection of options.
Thank you, Worship. I think that probably it's not appropriate to remove the entire option. I think my main concern was about a temporal aspect of pilot, essentially not creating further delay in this process, which has been so long delayed. So we've received some further information about potentially trialing a physical area, geographic area, it's open-ended, really. There's much to be decided on that. So I would not favor putting forward a motion to remove the option entirely, just with the option of, with the caveat that I would just register my own opinion that incurring a temporal delay is not what we want to accomplish here. So that was why the flag went up for me.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Green and then Councillor Braithwaite.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Appleton. I was part of a council and lived in a community where we actually did a pilot in a neighborhood, and it was actually phase one of a phased-in approach to secondary suites, and that proved to be successful. And North Salish now has regulated suites across the municipality in all areas. So I would not like to remove that particular option. Number one, I think we should provide the information that was provided to us by the consultant and by Ms. Jensen. We have paid for a very good report, and I think that we owe it to the community to give it all of the information. I understand, though, your concern that some people might perceive that as a delay. What it actually does, though, it enables a community to test some of the characteristics of secondary suites that should be tested. You can see there's a real diversity among communities about how they regulate, if they regulate, whether they enforce. Some don't. The pilot was a really good experience from my perspective in a community that was smaller, granted, than Oak Bay, and not nearly as urban. It's a semi-rural community, I admit that. But it really garnered a buy-in. And over time, the community we had full support at the end of that process. So it's just comments from my perspective. Thank you.
Councillor Braithwaite, go ahead.
Thank you, and I wouldn't disagree with Councillor Green's comments. However, the one area where I would like to make a little bit of a suggestion would be that when I look at this, the scenarios A to F, I really feel that scenario A, where it says no owner occupancy required, that to me is something that wouldn't fit well within our community, and so I would like to propose that we take scenario A out of the mix and just keep scenarios B to F.
Okay, I'll take it as a motion. That's probably the simplest way of dealing with these. So if there's a seconder,
Second.
we'll move forward. Moved and seconded. You should have quasi-motivated already. Is there anything else you want to add to your comments?
No, I think that in all of the information that we've read and all of the feedback that we've had from people, that was one of the top things that people, I mean, some of the top things were owner occupancy and parking and regulation. Owner occupancy, I think, was probably one of the top things, and I think that sits well with most of the people in our community, and I would like to, acknowledge that by removing scenario A out of the options.
I don't. So I appreciate the comment. One of the we have here is the staff and the consultant have done an effort to create 7 scenarios out of almost an infinite number of variations of options. Option scenario A is the only one that has no additional parking required as an option. So I'm wondering if maybe the motion should just be to remove the owner occupancy not required as one of the options available in that piece, because that might make it a little simpler. Before you answer that, though, I'm just going to, Mr. Wong, I just from what your conception is of taking this to the community, what is, if that is the will of council? I'm not saying it is. We haven't had that discussion, but if that is the will of council, without impacting other aspects, but owner occupancy being a critical factor, what would be the best way of moving that forward in this layout?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, there are a number of components in scenario A, as you mentioned, that are different than the other scenarios. Parking being one. The second being the land use, in that the suites are permitted in all single-family homes. There's no minimum lot size as well, too. So it is, I suppose, the least restrictive of all of them. And so if it is council's, if the owner occupancy is the issue that council, in their understanding of the community, is one that should be consistent across the board, I would suggest potentially keeping scenario A in, and then having owner occupant, just changing the owner occupancy piece, because there are many other aspects of that for consideration. Just for council's information, and it may not have been clear in our description. As you move from scenario A through to B, C, D, and E, and F, those items that are actually bolded in blue are the things that change from scenario to scenario. And so So the difference between B and A is that the areas that are bolded, that suites are only in RS1 through RS5. There's a minimum lot size. Boarding is not permitted, and one off-street parking. And then you go to the next one, the area that's in blue bolded is the maximum unit size. And then scenario D, the 150 square meters. And so maybe that's a way to present to the community instead of the whole table. It really kind of shows, here's the difference between A and B. Here's the difference between B and C, C and D, E and F. And it's those ones that are bolded are the ones that you should really be thinking about as you move down the spectrum. But with respect to owner occupancy, if that is really something that council consistently thinks that they hear from the community, that is something that is kind of table stakes, then yes, I would suggest keeping scenario A in and then just changing owner occupancy to being required for scenario A.
Councillor Braithwaite.
And thank you for that, and thank you for that explanation. Sorry, I was looking at a printed copy in black and white, so I didn't realize of the bolding. But I'm okay with that actually, because it does then leave the door open for everyone to be able to have their opinion. But I would like to see where it says owner occupancy, that it would be the same as the others, that it's required.
So procedurally, you want to modify your motion to
I
just
will.
change the one item?
Yeah.
Is the seconder amenable to that?
Friendly amendment, that'd be fine.
Thank you. So you're welcome to do so with the mover and seconder in agreement. So the motion that you want to put forward is just to remove the owner occupancy under that and just as not required to making it required as it is with other things. So on that item, can we just have a quick discussion on, go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Well, I don't have a problem with the whole scenario being included as it reads now, mainly because I'm understanding this is a tool to get information. It's not considered really an option per se that that will come back and tell us whether the community agrees with this option. It's a way to elicit information. And as for owner occupancy, I would like to hear what people's opinions are around that and not make the decision outright at this table. I mean, I'm thinking of a scenario where somebody goes on holidays for a couple months, okay? So, or what if somebody's on sabbatical for a year or two? So then there's no way for them to... then now they're not allowed to use the secondary suite. I mean, I don't know how it all plays out, but I would like to be able to consider that with more information from the community and what that particular attribute could look like in terms of a policy around related to secondary suites. So I don't feel able to support the motion as it reads right.
Okay, thanks to Councillor Ney. Councillor Appleton, you were next.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just very much concur with Councillor Ney's comments. I'm not in support of the motion as it stands, not because I don't agree with Councillor Braithwaite's idea that this is of importance to the community. I think that could very well be the feedback that we receive from the community, and we've heard that to this point. But in the spirit of evaluating the maximum number of options and hearing from the community in the most fulsome way, presenting the full spectrum of options, I'd like to see it remain, option A remain the way it is.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking in favor of the motion, that I seconded it. I see 3 of the 5 comparisons do have owner occupancy of some sort in their zoning requirements. And for it to fly in Oak Bay, in my estimation, I don't think this would even fly unless it absolutely had owner occupancy. So it seems to me reasonable to just drop it now. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other discussion on this item? I'm not seeing it. So the motion on the floor, just we're all clear, is to amend this output to strike the not required, essentially, to make it required as part of option A, so that the owner occupancy is not provided as an option in our customer feedback process. So with that motion on the table, all those in favor and opposed? Oh, I want to hear. I'll be opposed to it. I think it's not a very viable option, but I think in the interest of just keeping this as whole as possible, we'll keep it in there. So that fails on that vote. So I hope somebody tracked who was voting for and against. Good, because I didn't read them out. Although I certainly could have a hard time picturing a scenario where I would support a non-owner occupancy. I think it'd be just interesting for people to make that selection themselves as part of this feedback. Any other changes or corrections on this? Not corrections, but any other changes that people wish to see? I don't see anything here. Again, I would just reiterate, I think, what I meant to allude to before. I think it's important for people not to be too pigeonholed into the scenarios, because I can certainly see people wanting not owner occupation, but having a size restriction on lots or something along those natures. So I'm hoping that there's some mechanism we have for feedback that allows for that kind of that nuance of feedback from the public, and ideally why, so we can get some more than just yes, no, but also some arguments made in there that we understand that, because the next stage is for us to come back here and frankly fine tune this as to what we want this to look like in our community. So that's sitting here in front of us. We have motions really just to receive if there's no changes to be made. Are there any other changes that people want to see on this? It's just as it was presented, essentially. I'm not seeing any. So can I get a motion to receive both of these reports?
I'll move to receive for information on both of these reports.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion? I'm not seeing any, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. We are moving on to, that took a little longer than anticipated, but we still have time to get through the balance of our agenda. We have something more straightforward, but no less exciting, is the contract award recommendation for the Municipal Hall Granite Room Renovation Project. I believe we have Mr. Cockle on the phone, as Mr. Haran is unavailable this evening. Mr. Cockle, who has been involved in helping to manage this process to date, are you available on the phone?
Good evening, Your Worship and councillors. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Cockle. Would you worthwhile just to provide a quick overview of the report in front of us?
Certainly. So staff have put a contract award recommendation forward to you for consideration this evening for the Municipal Hall and Granite Room Renovation Project. As you're aware, the Municipal Hall renovation project is to complete a series of health and safety and life extension upgrades to the Municipal Hall to get us out another 10 to 15 years on the building. And the process was approved in the 2020-2024 financial plan. We've completed phase one of this project in 2019, which included doing some boiler work, some roof work, painting in the council chambers, interior, exterior, and so forth. Now we're into the more detailed design of upgrading the actual administrative areas of the Municipal Hall and the working areas of the Municipal Hall. So this year in 2020, we completed a detailed design with the district's architectural design contractor in the summer and fall of 2020. A competitive invitation to tender process to select a general contractor was initiated in November of 2020. The tenders were received and evaluated in December, and this report summarizes the results of the tendering process and seeks the approval of council to award the construction contract to the winning bidder, who was Aero Construction, in accordance with their tender submission.
Thank you, Mr. Cockle. Are there questions of Mr. Cockle on this report? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, and through you to Mr. Cockle. Mr. Cockle, it's nice to hear your voice again around the council table. I have just a quick question, just out of curiosity. I look at the amounts that came in for the bids, and I noticed that two of the bids, one is 50% more than the bid that we're going to be hopefully accepting today, and the other is 300% higher. Is there a particular reason for that? It just seems astonishing to me.
Mr. Cockle?
Through you, Your Worship. The top bidder, when they put in their challenge of the quote, at the last minute, what happens is everybody faxes you a number as to what the actual number is going to be, and it usually has a reduction in the number. Unfortunately, with the first one, all we got was blank pages, so there was they didn't meet the rest of the tender document, so that's where it ended up. But with the rest of them, all of them had put in their final numbers after they got them from their subcontractors and from the companies supplying building materials and so forth. And these are the actual construction numbers that we got.
Thank you, Mr. Cockle. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to Mr. Cockrell. It is nice to hear your voice again. And I certainly appreciate Councillor Braithwaite asking that question, because it certainly was skewed numbers that on the tender. On this, a couple of questions that I have, and I think with Mr. Horan not here, it would be difficult for Mr. Cockrell to answer them, and so perhaps note could just be taken and we can deal with it at a different time. But in terms of the 2016 Building Asset Management Report, I would be interested in knowing how Phase 1 and 2 of these renovations, how they compare to that asset management report and the recommendations in the report on both the scope of the work and the total cost estimates, because right now that is the only document that as a member of council I have to refer to for the building asset management. And the other thing, perhaps Mr. Cockrell will be aware of, but the intent in the report is to extend the life of the building 10 to 15 years. And I don't want to anyone to construe that I don't think that the work is necessary. I absolutely support the work being done in Municipal Hall to bring the work environment up to a more appropriate standard for our staff. But it does say that this is to extend the life of the building 10 to 15 years. And the cost of the seismic upgrading is prohibitive. Understandable, but if it would be good to have a follow-up to that, so to know what the recovery plan for Municipal Hall services if a seismic event occurred. And that may also have to wait till Mr. Horan comes back, or perhaps another member of the staff can answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Cockle, you're here. If you're able to answer either of those or both of those questions, you're more than welcome to do so. Otherwise, we can raise it later with the Director of Engineering.
I am able to speak to the 2016 report because I was involved with that as an employee. What we were told in that report was that it was going to take us a minimum of $100,000 a year per year in maintenance to the Municipal Hall in order to keep it running for the next 10 years. That was in 2016. So in the 4 years from 2016, we didn't really start anything until 2019. So that's when we started putting some money into the building and actually doing the first 2 years. What we did is figure out what actually needed to be done with the building before we made some decisions to move it forward. So, but the 10-year plan over of that report was that we would be spending $100,000 a year. And to speak to the seismic piece of it, it's incomprehensible to do the seismic work on this building based on how it was built. Every contractor we talked to said, if you're going to do that, it's a tear down. And that's a decision that I think as we move forward here, council will make that decision hopefully 10 to 15 years out, so we can continue to function in this building and make the decisions we need to make on some of the other buildings that we have in the municipality that also have to be renovated or updated. Does that help?
Thank you. That does help, but I just want to clarify two things. The reason I asked the question about the Moore-Wilson report, certainly I have confidence in the recommendations staff have made about the work that is required. My interest is primarily in the validity of the report itself and the information that is contained in that report, that it is relevant to us as members of council on planning, because all of our buildings are listed, so it's more than Municipal Hall. So it's certainly understanding the completeness of that report and the relevance of it today, knowing that it was done in 2016. And again, appreciating the fact that seismic upgrading to the building is would be difficult to achieve, and I think we all know that, but it always is. Then if that doesn't occur, what is the recovery plan for those services? Because by not doing that, it seems that you need to have some other plan to deal with circumstances, if not here at a seismically constructed building. So, and perhaps those things can wait and we can deal with them at another meeting, but I would be interested in knowing those what the answers are.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I can foresee a council in the park if that doesn't happen. Any other questions of Mr. Cockle? I'm not seeing any. Do you need a motion here?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Second.
Staff recommendation to award the tender to Arrow Construction. Any other discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. That carries. Thank you, Mr. Cockle, for your time and your work on this project.
Thank you and good evening, Your Worship.
Good evening. We're moving on to the bylaws and permits section. So this is a section where we invite public input onto the items in front of us. So if you're looking to call in on any of these items, you can call in to the number and the passcode that's in the agenda. It's right before the call to order at the start of the agenda. You'll see a 1-855 number along with the actual meeting numbers and the passcode to join. So it's just a standard sort of teleconference type joining. I would ask that you mute yourself until you're ready to talk, I think is required, or this is the first time we've used this. Ms. Williams, is that something that we can control the muting or something that we can control the muting. So don't worry about that. Just call in and we'll take you on as you wish to speak. So, item first up on the agenda is development variance permit and an upland siting and design for 2740 Beach Drive. Ms. Jensen, we've had this in front of Committee of the Whole. Previously, it's gone out for notification. Can you provide us a quick update or overview of this item? Ms. Jensen, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yes, thank you.
I feel like one of those cell phone commercials. Yes, so council did see this proposal on December 14th, where the applicant was proposing to construct a new 2-story home with 2 accessory buildings in the rear yard. One of the aspects of that proposal was a requested variance to the side lot line for placement of one of those accessory buildings. Coming out of the Committee of the Whole meeting, the council did recommend that the development variance permit application be denied and that the siting and design application be referred back to staff to work with the applicant to site that accessory building so that no variances would be required. So as such, no notification has gone out for the proposed variance, and the applicant has been working on revising their plans to ensure the accessory building is compliant with the zoning bylaw requirements. Based on what Committee of the Whole recommended, we do anticipate that would then come back to an upcoming council meeting.
Okay, so the appropriate motion here is that the citing be denied, and just as it's worded here, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Are there any questions of staff on this item? Councillor Zelka?
Point of procedure, if we deny it, isn't there a 6-month no? They can't apply again for 6 months?
Correct. If it's unchanged, they cannot bring it back again. But if it's changed, it may come back.
I'll make the motion as per the staff report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. I just have one just point of clarification, because I asked this of staff earlier, but it might be of interest to the council and to the public. We have not, where recommendations at the committee were to not move it forward, they essentially died there and went back without coming to this table. This is the first time we've had a recommendation to decline come to the council table. So I'm just going to ask Ms. Williams, this is a new thing for us, so could you maybe a brief explanation of why, if the committee recommends against it, it still comes to this table for discussion?
Thank you, Your Worship. The reason that it's before you tonight is simply because it was a committee that made the recommendation that you deny it, and it has to come to council in order for the DP to be issued or denied. So this is to solidify either solidify the committee's recommendation or to make an alternate decision.
Okay, and again, reiterating the fact that this is the decision-making body, committees are only recommending. Okay, I just think that's helpful because we have not followed that process in the past, so it might be a bit confusing for people to see it on an agenda item. But in this case, the notification did not go out to the, okay, thank you. Any other discussion on this item? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Thank you very much. For the next item on the agenda, I'm going to have to just recuse myself as I'm within the a fairly close proximity to the application. So I'm going to hand this over to the current acting mayor, who is Councillor Green. So if you just excuse me for a couple of minutes, I'll step out and just knock on the door when you're ready to call me back in again. Hold on.
Okay, okay, thank you. 6.2, which is the DVP 00103 Development Variance Permit for 388 King George Terrace. And as you know from the notes, this was before us on December the 14th, 2020, at Committee of the Whole. Ms. Jensen, do you have anything to add to the report that you prepared at that time in December?
Thank you. No changes have been made since that report in December. I just would note that we did send notification out on the application, which is a 50-meter radius for notification. That went out on December 24th. Correspondence has been received as a result of that notification and is attached to your agenda.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Williams, is there anyone on the line for this item tonight?
At this time, no, there are no callers.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll go to council. This, as I said, is a decision that we made in December. Are there any further comments or questions on this particular application in light of the correspondence that we received as well? Councillor Appleton?
I will move the recommendation from Committee of the Whole.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Braithwaite. Any further comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. And I will just, thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. We'll just get the mayor back in here.
Thank you, Councillor Green, for taking over in my absence.
You're
Much
welcome.
appreciated. Item number 6.3 on the agenda, Development Variance Permit 2690 Beach Drive. Ms. Jensen, if you want to give an overview.
Thank you, Your Worship. Similar to the other two applications, Council saw this on December 14th meeting. The applicant is proposing renovations to an accessory building which was constructed in 1942 and is considered legal nonconforming because of its siting. Because of the modifications, they do require a variance to undertake the works as they're increasing the height of the building by approximately 2 feet. Notification was sent to nearby property owners within that 50-meter radius on December 24th, and no correspondence has been submitted in response to that notification.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions of council on this application? Is there any, Ms. Williams, is there anybody who wishes to speak to this application called in?
No, Your Worship, no calls.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, back to this table, if we can just have a motion to speak to.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Second.
Moved and seconded, thank you. Is there any discussion on this variance permit? I'm not seeing any. All right, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Item number 7.1 on the agenda is ABICC resolutions notice. This is really just to make sure it's on the record that people know that there is a deadline towards the end of February for resolutions that we wish to make. It's not a call tonight to make them necessarily, but I'm going to put Councillor Braithwaite on the spot. I'm not sure if Councillor Braithwaite, who's on the executive, is able to provide any update in terms of what's expected with this year, or do we have to wait a bit more before the details are finalized?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yeah, the details haven't been finalized for the AGM convention, except for the fact that we have chosen a tentative date, which is May 28th, and it's going to be a one-day event on a Friday, but something will be coming out that will have that date in there as a placeholder. So hopefully that will continue to be the date. And I would just say that as this is a year of COVID, I'm hoping that we won't receive a deluge of resolutions because it's a very different year, and we aren't going to have the time to be able to go over the resolutions as we would have in the past over a weekend. That would have been a normal AVICC. So please keep that in mind.
Resolutions welcome, just not too many. Got it. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I have a question for Councillor Braithwaite. Is there, you may not have gotten there yet, but is there the possibility of considering resolutions as a block as they did at UBCM?
Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yes, we had a very long discussion at our AVICC meeting on Friday as to what that might look like, and yes, it's kind of still up in the air. I think what we'll do is we'll wait till the resolutions come in, and then we'll make a decision after that.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Did you have Councillor Green?
Just to reiterate my question to you earlier, and that was whether or not this council is thinking of any resolutions to submit. That was just my question. Yeah.
Well, it's up to individual councillors to submit. So if anybody on this council, especially for those who are newer, wish to bring anything forward, you're welcome to, and we can have that debate here as to whether or not we want to send them forward as a resolution. I hear Councillor Braithwaite's request for not deluging, but there's often some really important issues that come up, and that's just the chance to raise them to a more provincial level through AVIC and then to UBCM. So I know in the past, maybe Councillor Braithwaite, you can answer this question through me to you. The strong request was that anything that wasn't an urgent matter or of other nature go through these regional bodies. Is that still the case this year, despite these constraints?
Yeah, absolutely. That's still
okay.
the
So
case.
if we want to make a resolution that isn't a late or an emergency resolution, it's still appropriate to bring them for the February deadline.
And something that perhaps hasn't been brought forward in previous years.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question on process, and thank you to Ms. Williams. We have a draft resolution format, a clip to the back of our agenda, and I appreciate that. Thank you. I just wondered what would be the process then for Oak Bay at this point? What if someone wants to bring forward a resolution, what would the next steps be, or do you want to wait till another time to?
No, I think so. For all councillors, I think if you wish to bring forward a resolution, the first step would just be reach out to our administrative staff and just suggest, here's what I'm thinking of bringing forward. They can work with you on a format to bring that. Usually it consists of a few whereas clauses and then the main motion, and they can assist with that. If that way as well, if there's, say, for some reason 4 different councillors who want to bring a similar motion to the table, then they can see that and help ensure that there's sort of the concerns or ideas are put forward. That'd be my suggestion. All right, thank you. There's really nothing to, I guess, just the motion to receive.
I'll move receipt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing any, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. And always a favorite one of the evening.
Move adjournment.
Moved and seconded. Before I call the question, just thank you, everyone. I think that went reasonably smoothly for new procedures bylaw. Thank you for staff for preparing everything in a way that was fairly straightforward and easy. And I'm certainly looking forward to the next couple of iterations through committee of the whole and council to see how this works through as we get some of these land use applications and notification processes worked through. Hopefully we'll have it all fine-tuned and ticking smoothly by in the next month or two. So thank you very much, everyone. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. We are adjourned. Time is now 9:15. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff, and we'll see you next week. Or I guess we'll see you Thursday for the public hearing. And again, Ms. Williams, that time is 7 o'clock. Is that correct?
It is.
So 7 o'clock public hearing on Thursday. Thank you.